What if one person, a single human being, was simultaneously the greatest painter of his era, a pioneering anatomist who dissected over 30 human corpses to understand how the body worked, an engineer who designed flying machines 400 years before the Wright Brothers, a hydraulic engineer, a botanist, a geologist, a musician, a cartographer, and an inventor of war machines, all while never finishing half the things he started? His name was Leonardo da Vinci. And the most astonishing thing about him is not what he achieved, it's what he left unfinished. Leonardo was born on April 15, 1452, in the small Tuscan hill town of Vinci, in the Republic of Florence. His birth was, by the standards of his time, thoroughly illegitimate. He was the natural son of a wealthy Florentine notary named Ser Piero da Vinci and a peasant woman named Caterina, who was probably a servant or tenant farmer. They were never married. Leonardo grew up initially with his mother, then was taken in by his paternal grandfather and uncle on the da Vinci family estate. Being illegitimate had real consequences. Leonardo was barred from attending a university or entering most of the learned professions his father practiced. He could not become a notary, a lawyer, or a physician through any formal route. In a paradox that would define his life, the institution of education was largely closed to him, which meant he was forced to educate himself. And what an education it turned out to be. As a boy, Leonardo showed an almost compulsive need to observe and draw everything around him: birds in flight, the way water moved around rocks in a stream, the structure of flowers, the expression on a stranger's face. His father, recognizing something extraordinary in the boy's drawings, arranged for him to apprentice at the age of 14 with Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the finest artists and sculptors in Florence, the city that was, at that moment, the center of the entire Renaissance world. As an apprentice, Leonardo quickly surpassed his master. The story goes that when Verrocchio saw the angel Leonardo had painted in their collaborative work The Baptism of Christ, he put down his brushes and refused to paint again, declaring that his student had already exceeded him. Leonardo was 17. He moved to Milan in 1482, at age 30, to work for Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan. He pitched himself not as a painter but as a military engineer, listing in his job application his ability to design portable bridges, siege weapons, armored vehicles, and naval craft. Painting, he mentioned almost as an afterthought. The letter is one of the most audacious job applications in history, and it worked. In Milan he produced some of the most celebrated works ever made: The Virgin of the Rocks, Lady with an Ermine, and most famously, painted directly onto the wall of a Milan dining hall, The Last Supper, completed around 1498, a masterpiece of composition, perspective, and human psychology that has been studied, reproduced, and reverenced for over 5 centuries. Back in Florence, he began the painting that would become the most famous image in human history. He started the Mona Lisa around 1503 and worked on it, on and off, for the rest of his life, carrying it with him wherever he went, never declaring it finished. To this day, art historians argue about who she was, why she's smiling, and what Leonardo was actually doing with that haunting, shifting gaze. But painting was only one face of an extraordinary mind. Leonardo's notebooks, over 7,000 pages that survive, out of an estimated 13,000 he produced, reveal a man who was designing things the world wouldn't catch up to for centuries. He sketched a flying machine based on the anatomy of birds' wings, a design eerily close to what the Wright brothers would eventually build. He designed a solar power concentrator, a rudimentary tank, a robot in the form of a mechanical knight, a helicopter, a calculator, and an underwater diving suit. He mapped the course of rivers and designed canal systems. He studied the geology of rock strata and correctly deduced that fossils were the remains of ancient creatures, predating the scientific consensus by centuries. His anatomical studies were perhaps the most scientifically rigorous work of his life. He dissected human corpses, illegal and dangerous in Renaissance Italy, and produced drawings of the human body so accurate, so detailed, and so beautiful that they were not surpassed for nearly 300 years. He was the first person to correctly describe the action of the heart's ventricles. He drew the first accurate cross-sections of the human skull. He understood the workings of the eye, the fetus in the womb, the structure of muscle and bone, with a clarity that put him centuries ahead of formal medical science. Leonardo's impact is almost impossible to overstate, and simultaneously difficult to measure, because so much of it was hidden in notebooks that weren't widely published until centuries after his death. His paintings alone would secure any artist's immortality. The Mona Lisa, hanging today in the Louvre in Paris behind bulletproof glass, is visited by approximately 10 million people every year, more than any other artwork on Earth. The Last Supper is the most reproduced religious painting in history. Vitruvian Man, his famous drawing of a figure inscribed in a circle and square, has become the universal symbol of the relationship between humanity and mathematics, between art and science. But beyond the paintings, Leonardo's notebooks represent the most extraordinary private record of a human mind ever committed to paper. When they were eventually published and studied, mostly in the 19th and 20th centuries, scientists and engineers were repeatedly stunned to find that Leonardo had anticipated discoveries and inventions they believed were entirely modern. His hydraulic studies anticipated principles that wouldn't be formalized for a century. His aerodynamic sketches showed an understanding of lift that predated aviation theory. His anatomical drawings were more accurate than those in medical textbooks published 200 years after his death. He also pioneered the technique of sfumato, the subtle blending of tones and edges that gives the Mona Lisa her legendary atmospheric quality, a technique that influenced virtually every painter who came after him and which remains a cornerstone of realistic painting to this day. His approach to chiaroscuro, the dramatic use of light and shadow, transformed Western art permanently, influencing Michelangelo, Raphael, Caravaggio, and everyone who followed them. In his final years, Leonardo accepted an extraordinary invitation from King Francis I of France, who admired him extravagantly, to come to France and live out his days as the royal court's resident genius. In 1516, at age 64, Leonardo made the long journey over the Alps on the back of a mule, carrying with him 3 paintings, the Mona Lisa, the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, and Saint John the Baptist. He settled in a small chateau at Amboise called Clos-le-Sec, connected by an underground tunnel to the royal chateau nearby so the king could visit him at any hour. He spent his final 3 years in France, unable to paint much due to partial paralysis of his right hand, but still designing, thinking, sketching left-handed, and receiving visits from the king who called him a genius and a friend. Contemporary accounts describe the king weeping at his bedside as Leonardo died. Leonardo da Vinci died on May 2, 1519, at Clos-le-Sec, Amboise, France, at the age of 67. His student and companion Francesco Melzi wrote that his death was a loss felt by all, because nature could not create another like him. He left behind thousands of notebook pages, a handful of completed paintings, and a mind so far ahead of its time that we are, in many ways, still catching up. Leonardo da Vinci was born illegitimate, barred from formal education, and never finished most of what he started. He left no school of followers, published no books, founded no institution. By the narrow measure of his own era's success, he was in many ways a failure. And yet, the paintings survive. The notebooks survived. And in them, one of the most restlessly curious minds in human history left us a record of what it looks like when a person refuses to stop asking questions about the body, the sky, the water, the light, the face of a woman who may or may not be smiling. He once wrote in his notebook, "I have been impressed with the urgency of doing. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Being willing is not enough. We must do." The man who designed flying machines 400 years before flight, who painted the most famous face in the world, who mapped the human body with more accuracy than any physician of his age, spent his whole life doing, applying, questioning. And the world is still catching up. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Who do you want to see next?